So my background is in journalism, going way back to the 1980s. And I worked for newspapers, and most of the time I was a reporter who specialized in covering medicine and science. So I did that for a number of years. Then I became director of publications at Harvard Medical School, reporting on the science done by Harvard medical researchers. And after that, I co-founded a publishing company that focused on the business of clinical drug trials. When I say focused on the business, we actually were reporting on the money to be made in clinical trials by people doing the trials and all these providers. So in the beginning, we were sort of seen by industry as very favorable to them. We were saying, here's a business opportunity. We were charting it. But what happened was, while I was doing that and doing the reporting on that, I began to understand that those commercial influences were corrupting the trials. So trials were being designed in ways to make the drugs look good as opposed to really assess their safety and efficacy. That was the first thing. Then you found that the money that was going to the investigators, the doctors, the academic doctors, was corrupting their sort of reports of these drugs. So oddly enough, through that, I discovered sort of this dark heart of medicine, and in particular in psychiatry, which rather than being a pursuit of to improve public health, bring drugs to market that are going to help you, I began to see almost solely through this commercial enterprise of bringing drugs to market. And what you saw was that as part of that commercial enterprise was telling a marketing story to the public. So drugs fix chemical imbalances. Now that actually wasn't true, but it was all a marketing thing in the same way you might sell, I don't know, a car or toothpaste or something. And I had always thought that medicine was pristine, and it was sort of free of these dirtying influences. And if you believe that science can be honest science can be such a force for good, for improving public health, when you see the corruption of that and false storytelling, you feel that the public is really losing something profound. And that's what you see, particularly in psychiatric research, but it's spread to other areas of medicine as well. When you look at, so I was a newspaper reporter, it means that I was part of the ordinary getting news out to the public. And what happens so often is a couple of things. I first covered politics, okay? When you covered politics, you said, I don't believe a thing they say, politicians lie to you all the time. And businessmen was sort of the same thing. But when you covered doctors, when you covered scientists, you were literally told, these guys are the experts, and your job, as much as anything, is to translate what they say and make it accessible to a lay public. In other words, you suddenly stopped questioning them. They were beyond questioning because they knew something you didn't. So that actually imbues the whole sort of coverage of science and medicine. You have a lot of reporters who loved, science, loved medicine, but that's when as children and all, they put scientists up on a pedestal. They put doctors up on a pedestal. Some of them deserve it. But the problem is that means they're not reporters. They stop being reporters. They've become more translators. And what you see happen, we'll say with medical news, is you'll have the major journals. They'll put out a press release and they'll say, this week, these are important stories. Okay. And then they'll even send out often, if it's a pharmaceutical company, here's who you can interview. Here's the take-home points. And what you see over and over again is whatever story that is designed to be told, sort of a soundbite fashion, that's what gets repeated. And either out of laziness or sort of a lack of confidence in really digging into the study and challenging the findings, you see people basically in the media taking that semi-prepared story on a platter and running with it. And if you want, I can give you a great example of something that just happened. There recently was a report in Lancet Psychiatry, and it said, big analysis, and the finding was, and this went out to the media, children with ADHD have smaller brains than normal. And this proves that it's a brain disease, okay? And that's what they said. And you saw this go around the world. The debate is over. Kids with ADHD have smaller brains. Well, if you looked into the study, and you know how to look at studies, what you found is that if they were accounting for drug exposure, it wasn't clear how they had done that. But even more important is you actually, if you measure brain volumes, for example, you're going to get a bell curve, some smaller brains, et cetera. So if you took the bell curve for, quote, normal brains and the bell curve for ADHD brains, they were almost exactly the same. And in fact, a person diagnosed with ADHD had a 44% chance of having a brain above the median size of the control group. So they didn't find that kids with ADHD had smaller brains, as a matter of course. So just to give you an example, all the mainstream media said it's been found that kids have smaller brains than normal. Here at Mad in America, we said, no, that's not true. And we published an example of the bell curves. So unfortunately, in mainstream media, they're not actually critically examining the findings, the methodology. They don't have the time, they don't have the confidence. And there isn't in a newspaper or a larger media, editors who don't know anything about science don't really want to see their reporters questioning someone from Harvard Medical School. Who are you to question someone from Harvard Medical School or whatever, prestigious university is in Denmark? You don't do that. So that's the problem. So I had published a book called Anatomy of an Epidemic. And the story was about how do psychiatric drugs affect long-term outcomes, okay? And the conclusion was they, on the whole, are making things worse. They're increasing the chronicity and also increase the risk someone will become disabled. True for antidepressants, true for antipsychotics, stimulants. You can imagine that's a controversial book, right? So I got attacked pretty good in the press. And then I came to Copenhagen. I was giving a talk on this. I was sponsored by some user groups. And all of a sudden, a man stands up. And he goes, I'm going to look into this. This is really interesting. I'm going to look into this. It was Peter Gauthier. So I felt so grateful to Peter that here was this man with an international reputation for being someone with an independent mind, a skeptical mind, but a really good scientist. And so I said, great. Here's a scientist with the Cochrane collaboration, one of the founders, and he's going to take a look at this. And then there'll either be some validation, or maybe he'll say, this is where this analysis by Whitaker was wrong. And what did he find? He said, I conclude that the evidence is overwhelming that psychiatric drugs as currently used do more harm than good. So I felt very grateful for that. And then after that, Peter invited me to speak here. We've spoken at many conferences together. So we became friends. And then I always thought Peter's very outspoken. He's blunt. He's a lot more blunt. I'm not blunt. He's blunt. But I always thought he was going to be safe against this sort of firing because of his being well known for being a good scientist and with a co-founder of the Cochrane collaboration. Then when the Cochrane thing expelled him, and Peter had been warning me about this, I was still shocked. We, Mad in America, this website I ran some pieces by Peter. I wrote a piece about it. We also helped do a write-in campaign of protest to the Cochrane collaboration. So then the next thing happens, Peter loses his job at the hospital. That one completely stunned me. I will be honest with you, I thought Denmark was not a place this would happen. We sort of hold up Denmark as sort of the paragon of virtue. And then when he came up with this idea of starting an institute for scientific integrity and freedom, I was just honored to be invited to speak. I think if they can get it going, it could be incredibly important. And unfortunately, the Cochrane collaboration is a little bit tainted now, not just because of him, but if you look at a lot of the reviews, they're pretty industry friendly now. They're not really questioning things. And then so once it gets a Cochrane stamp on it, it's like, oh, it's got the Cochrane stamp. So I think this is vitally needed. Peter is a fighter. And I hope that the institution can take some of his values, that good, solid science can be a path to truth and better public health. And hopefully that's what this can do. Because, and you heard some of the other presenters this morning, commercialization, like with the statins and all, is getting us to be way overtreated, way overdiagnosed, without any sign that it improves public health. So where we are today, we really need this counter to this commercializing of medicine.